Our guest this hour is one of the most celebrated and pioneering television producers of all time. His career spans 70 years, and he's worked with everyone who was ever worth a damn in Hollywood. Legendary stars like Judy Garland, Dinah Shore, Danny Thomas, Frank Sinatra, the list goes on and on. Not to mention, he brought us Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, which entirely changed the way comedy could be shown on network television. His recent memoir, Still Laughing, A Life in Comedy, just came out in paperback. Such a great thrill to have George Schlatter with us, and I hope he's going to enjoy himself and agree to stay the whole hour, because there's a lot to cover here.
Depends on whether or not you're enjoying me. And that's still shaky. We don't know how that's going to work yet.
Right.
It's an interesting story on the book because what happened, they wanted to do a book, so I started dictating stories about my whole history, right? And I have assistant Martha Bowes, who followed me around for months and would write down all of these stories. I then gave it to John Max, who's one of the most well-known comedy writers, and I said, John, here's this book. Now, take it and take everything out of that I shouldn't tell about, right? So he cut the book in half, and what you're reading is what was left out of my long and shady career. So I may come out with a second edition on Never Before, right?
Yeah.
But anyhow, did you see the book?
I did, yeah. You know, maybe the second edition could be called My Long and Shady Career.
That would be it. I was going to call it Oops.
So I want to go right back to the very beginning. A young boy might dream one day of becoming a cowboy or a fireman, but TV producer tends not to be one of those occupations. How did you get into the production world?
Oh, boy, how much time you got? I mean, it's a long story. I mean, I grew up and I had a lot of jobs. MC, I was wrapping window cards for piano players. Anyhow, I got a job at Ciro's, in the nightclub on the Sunset Strip. Then I got to know all the performers and whatever, and got to know all the comedians. And they released a story that Dinah Shore was going to do a television series. Remember the old Chevy show?
Hello, and welcome to our show for Chevrolet.
And so I wanted to do that. So they hired me because Dinah wanted to do some comedy, and I had grown up with all these comics. So then that went along, and then Judy Garland was going to do a series, so I went on, applied for that, and I got that job. So it just kept building and building, and all the people that I knew, and that all wound up in the book.
Now, when you were hired for Judy Garland, did she want to incorporate comedy into her show as well?
Yes. What happened was I'd read the show, and I wanted to do the show, but I didn't know how to audition for Judy Garland, you know? So I chased her down the street. I got in the car. I got in the car, so I didn't know what to say to Judy Garland. So they set up this meeting, and I was in the office, and I was working late, and Bob Woods was still there. And I showed up, and he said, come downstairs, and come downstairs. So I went downstairs, and there was Judy Garland, who was tiny, much smaller than I ever imagined, you know? And I didn't know what to say. And I said, Miss Garland, I don't care what you may have heard about me, there's no truth to the rumor that I'm difficult. Now, you understand, I wanted that job, but I didn't know what to say. So she said, you're difficult? I said, see, you've even heard it. And she says, well, I'm difficult too. Let's go have a drink. And my first meeting with Judy Garland really lasted maybe 3 minutes.
Wow.
And we went out and we had some leaf from milks we had. And we had a great time, and I made her laugh. The secret to Judy Garland was to make her laugh, because she got that coil would get so tightly wound up, you know, when she was ready to perform. She was like a little racehorse. But if you could make her laugh, you could break the coil. So I did strange things to Judy just to make her laugh.
You know, it's so funny you say that, because when I watch those shows, what strikes me about Judy Garland is that she is such a great audience for the comedians that are on there, because she's tickled to death.
That was the secret. That was my success with Judy Garland. I could make her laugh.
Yeah.
And she just loved it. And the thing with Judy that could always crack her up is the sound of a fart, and she would just collapse. So anytime we cornered the market on a thing called the handy gas machine, right? And anytime she became difficult or resistant, we would let that sound go out over the speakers, and she would collapse. She would just sit down. So much of my success with Judy Garland was this little handy gas machine. Because she loved to laugh, and she demanded to laugh. And when I could make Judy laugh, we broke that coil, because she was such a little racehorse. She was such a little, ready to go and just that boundless energy. And if you could make her laugh, it released it, and everything became the Judy that you saw in those shows.
You worked with someone I considered a comedy genius, and that's Jonathan Winters.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
I did Jonathan's first show.
Wow.
First major network telecast special. And I booked Art Carney was the guest star. And we put together a very, very funny rundown. And we left the reading and read that Kennedy had been shot.
Oh.
And the next time we got together with Jonathan and Art Carney was the day before the taping, because everybody was in shock. And so we had no rehearsal. And so we all showed up to do this show, and I said, go downstairs and get me every prop in the building. And so they went down, and they brought up all these hand props, and we gave them to Jonathan and Art Carney, and they said, what do we do? I said, just play. So they played for like an hour doing prop jokes, and I had to deliver the show. So we delivered the show, and they said, well, what is this? I said, it's great. It's the newest thing on the continent. They call it Comedy Verte. So anyhow, it was Jonathan Winters and Art Carney. When you see that show, they're just doing prop jokes and having the best time, like two children in a playground.
Can I ask you about working with and also your friendship with Frank Sinatra, who's my idol?
Yes. Well, he was one of the first people that I really got to know, and frequently during our relationship, we got work together, and we played together, and we would travel together, and eventually, when they had his funeral, his wife called. She wanted me to do a eulogy. And I said, Barbara, please. I'm not for that. She said, please. So I said, oh, okay, because everybody in the world was going to be there, but I had a kind of a relationship with him.
Right.
So I said, okay, as long as I don't have to follow Gregory Peck. So she said, okay. Sure enough, they're doing the funeral. There's Gregory Peck. But now introducing me is the bishop. And I didn't know what to say because I was kind of intimidated. And so I explained that I had introduced a lot more comics than bishops. So I called him Your Honor because I didn't know what to call a bishop. So I said, the bishop introduced me. I said, thank you, Your Honor. And, of course, the whole place collapsed. And it wasn't planned. It was just I didn't know what to call him. So I said, call him Your Honor. And that relaxed the whole thing, and so it became a wonderful, happy celebration of Mr. Sinatra. He was one of my favorites. We were just talking about, just talking to Jolene when we were calling you about some of my adventures with Frank. He was a bit to handle.
Yeah.
I mean, because you never knew what was going to happen. But if you just relaxed and let happen what was going to happen, it was usually a delightful experience.
Morgul as the friendly drone.
All right, let's move on to Laugh-In. Since you put this show together, why was it Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In and not George Schlatter's Laugh-In?
Well, because you must... Good question. You have to understand what I presented was an absolutely revolutionary concept. The show did not have any host. It just happened. It was all these bits and pieces. And they said, but I had to have a host. So we took it to Jim Ellers at Timex. And he said he would buy it if it had a host. So I'd worked with Rowan and Martin and Edie Adams, and I got to know Ernie Kovacs and so forth. So I'd worked with Rowan and Martin, and so I went to them, and we called it Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In as a way of getting a commitment from Timex. But if you remember, they only appeared in the opening and the closing, and then a couple of times in the middle of it, and the rest of the show kind of happened around them. And it made it work, because Dan was so straight and such a kind of leading man, and Dick was just so silly that that made it work. And the host, the idea of having a host is what got Timex to buy it, because otherwise I don't know how I ever would have been able to sell the show. Because when you remember, if you think back that far ago, long ago, it was pretty revolutionary to come out with just bits and pieces, and they got NBC really nervous. I said, "Don't go away. We'll be right back." And we dipped to black and came back and said, "See, we told you we'd be right back." The network went crazy. They said, "You just told the audience to tour." I said, "No, I told the audience to come back." But stuff like that made them very, very nervous. But the idea of having one traditional part helped get it sold, and that became Laugh-In. But in order to get the deal made, we called it Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Originally, it was just Laugh-In, but it worked.
Oh, boy, did it work.
When something works, how it works and why it works is an unnecessary detail.
One of the many things I love about Laugh-In, I'm sure people will tell you, is the cast of characters that came through there. And I think about shows that happened later. Like, for example, Saturday Night Live would have the benefit of going to Second City in Chicago and pulling talent from that. Where were you pulling the talent from for Laugh-In?
Well, to begin with, Lorne Michaels was one of the writers on Laugh-In. He came in, and he was one of the junior writers on Laugh-In. And I don't remember him ever writing very much, but he was a brilliant politician. But what happened was, my early life, you've done a lot of research, haven't you?
Yeah.
But my early life was centered around saloons, nightclubs, and whatever, and I knew a lot of these people. They were not people that were acceptable as actors or actresses. They were character people. I mean, Lily Tomlin was brilliant. She had 2 shows that she was not happy with, and I asked her to come in and talk. She came in, and in front of me became all of these different people. And I said, "Well, I want you to do the show." She said, "Which character?" I said, "I want you to do them all." So she came in and did Ernestine, the telephone operator. And it was on a Monday night, and by Tuesday, Wednesday, the world was talking about Ernestine.
One ringy-dingy.
She exploded, and then all of these other characters came out. And the same thing with Goldie. Goldie came into audition and made no sense at all, right? Because she was nervous, and she started to laugh, and I gave her an introduction to read, and she blew it. Something bad, right? Silly. And so she, "I'm so sorry, I'll do it again." I said, "No, Goldie, that'll be just fine." That's what we heard.
Good night, Lucy. Good night, Desi. Goodbye, Columbus.
And then Artie Johnson was selling suits at Carol's, and Ruth Buzzy had worked with Dom DeLuise. All of those were young character people, but if you think back to that age, that time, there was no place for them. Variety shows were singers, dancers, and musicians, and stand-up comics. There was no place for young character people, and that's what Laugh-In was based on.
Yes.
And, so we found these people that I'd met in salons and nightclubs and just socially, and Alan Seuss was an outrageous event, you know.
Yeah.
When you think about that flamboyant character that long ago, nobody's ever been on television like that. It's a good question because we rounded up young character people who would not have ever had a home anywhere else. And when we did that, then Second City and all of that, and Lorne Michaels came in and was working on Laugh-In and left and went out and rounded up young character people. And I still believe the original cast on Saturday Night Live was the reason it worked. You know, when you look at the cast now, you don't know who's who. But in the beginning, he did what we did on Laugh-In. He took those people and defied them and gave them enough to do that made them into stars.
Yeah, and I think about a performer who would be very unique, like Henry Gibson. Where else would he thrive?
That's it.
Yeah.
We did him as a preacher. Now, the idea of putting a religious figure into a comedy show, particularly a politically outrageous comedy show, was unheard of. Now, the reason for it is NBC had nothing to put opposite Lucille Ball and Gunsmoke. They were getting no rating at all on Monday night. And they had no money, and no, all they had was a time period to get no rating. So I said, well, I'll give you a show. So we put the show on the air, and they put it on reluctantly because it cost nothing, and they had nothing else to put on. And for the first 2-3 weeks, the network took a lot of heat because we were doing political jokes and subject matter that was not really universally popular at that point. And by the third week, people found it and started to get excited about the show, and the network reluctantly put it into this disastrous time period where we were getting no rating at all opposite Gunsmoke and Lucy. What we did at the end of the show, Artie Johnson as the German said, "Good night, Lucy. I love the show." and said, "I hope you enjoyed watching the show tonight, Lucy." Well, the idea of having your competition accused and thanked for watching the show was a bit revolution. The network said, "You can't do that." I said, "Why? The whole world is watching Lucy. Why not compliment her?" They said, "Because you were talking about the competition." I said, "The world is talking about the competition. We're the only ones not watching Lucy." And so we put it on, and we kind of upset Lucy in the beginning. We would thank her every week for "Good night, Lucy." You know, but see, the rules are made to be broken.
Yeah. I imagine the editing bays must have been working overtime because the editing on this, it's a very musical program, and I mean that just the rhythm of everything. Yeah.
Well, you have to understand how it was done. We shot it in bits and pieces. We shot it up until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and we would do a sketch, and it was as it was written. And if anything went wrong, many times we used what went wrong. Right. And we put it all together. A woman by the name of Carolyn Raskin, who developed many of the editing techniques that we now have. But at that time, we didn't have editing like you have now. We shot the show on, so this is more than you need, but we shot it on videotape, transferred the videotape to film, which had edge numbers. We edited the show on film, then transferred that editing to the video, and then put it on air. So we were editing right up until we went on the air. And that's why some of the shots in there look abrupt. That's because some things wouldn't get approved until right when we went on the air. So some of the editing by design appeared to be rough, you know, and it was rough. And but that added to the feeling of danger and the feeling of an adventure and the feeling of something new, because nothing like that had ever been on the air before. And but you got to understand, much of the success of Laugh-In was accident. The fact that they had nothing to put on in that time period, the fact that the cast, because they were young character people, there was no place for them on it. They weren't singers, dancers, musicians. So the fact that they were available as people who were not, you know, sought after. I mean, where are we going to get, you know, Judy Garland and Joanne Worley was singing opera, and so, but the unconventional. See, accident figures large, and if you can focus and enjoy and celebrate your accidents, you may be able to buy a house in Beverly Hills too.
And the show, you know, we talk about unique performers and accidents. Tiny Tim was an accident in a way because he launched. Tiny Tim
was a freak of nature. What happened was somebody brought Tiny Tim into the office. And I said, "Oh, my God." So I said, "I want Tiny Tim to come out on stage." They said, "You can't present because I said, only way I could get them to accept Tiny Tim, I said, "This is a character he's playing." So he said, "Oh, it's not a real guy." "No, it's a character he's playing." So when he came out, and Dick had never seen him, so when he came out doing Tiptoe Through the Tulips with that ukulele, and oh, that little voice, the audience went crazy. Tiny Tim exploded, and then we convinced the Tonight Show to use Tiny Tim, and then it also became big, you know, because at that point, Laugh-In didn't have that big a rating yet.
And yet, despite that, you had a number of really big stars on the show, like Jack Benny and Rock Hudson. I guess they just happened to be on the lot, but after a while...
No, what happened was we stopped them on the way from the Johnny Carson exiting, the Johnny Carson show. We would stop them in the hall. Because we didn't have any money, and nobody, what are they going to do? Laugh-In? What is that? What does that mean, right? So we would stop them in the hall. My favorite was John Wayne.
Yeah.
And John Wayne said, "I'm not going to do that crazy, but those people are crazy. I'm not going to do that show." And we put that on the air. And we stopped people in the hall, paid them scale, and by the time they were having a good time and people were getting laughs, they never got laughs before, you know, because some of those people in the early days of the cameos we did on Laugh-In were straight actors, you know.
Yeah.
But, see, the feeling of adventure. What I miss today is the feeling of adventure. I miss taking chances today with maybe dropping the F-bomb or something. Well, that's not it. We took chances with government. I mean, put Richard Nixon on saying, "Sock it to me," was unheard of. We got him in the hallway, and he said that may have helped him get elected. I've had to live with that, you know. The idea of Richard Nixon appearing on a comedy show today, you'd seek him, you know. But at that point, the idea that he might appear on Laugh-In was so outrageous that it captured a lot of the imagination.
Sock it to me?
From 1969, that was Judy Garland with a Laugh-In-inspired record. I guess you could call that some kind of a tie-in, called Sock It To Me, her catchphrase. We're chatting with George Schlatter, producer of Laugh-In, and his book, Still Laughing, A Life in Comedy, is out now in paperback. And very quickly, before we move away from Laugh-In, it was such a phenomenon that it spawned, I don't know if you had any say in this material or part in it, but it spawned magazines, which I own, paperback books, which I own, a hardcover book, which I own. There were toys and stickers, and it was such a huge phenomenon.
You've done a lot of research, haven't you, young fellow?
Well, I'm a nut.
Well, you're not. You're my kind of nut. If you could find a vacuum, a place where there is nothing, and fill that with something, you can have a hit. Well, we took chances on Laugh-In, and I don't know that anybody today would take the chances, because agents. I already had quite a bit of success with Dinah and Judy Garland and all of that stuff. So here comes this young guy with a mouth and willing to take chances and enjoying it, and then collected. There's a writer by the name of Digby Wolfe who had a big show in Australia and got canceled for taking on the government. We brought Digby into the United States, and he was a true revolutionary, and he collected a lot of these young writers who didn't have a place in television because there was no political satire, and so we collected this group of anarchist writers. And we put them in a room, and we would pitch jokes. And when you took a joke, we didn't need a whole sketch. If we just had a joke, it was a truly revolutionary process. I don't know that you can use any of this, but you can imagine me that many years ago. I mean, I'm a revolutionary now, but boy, oh boy, at that point. But boy, were we having fun. I don't see anybody having that much fun today. One, I don't know that anybody would try that today. And two, I don't know there would be a network that would have the guts to put that kind of a show on. The only reason they put it on then was desperation. They had nothing else to put on. Laugh-In cost almost no money, and they put it on the air overnight. And when the press found it, we did a screening for the press, and they sat in this thing and they looked and they said, "What the hell is this?"
But I have to just pause for a moment, and I have to ask you about Turn On.
Uh-oh, yeah.
So you were lured away to do Turn On for a bit.
Well, they wanted to do another show that would be an exciting event. So I said, I want to take this show and use all of the Moog synthesizer, which was a new sound then, and all of the editing techniques that Carolyn Raskin had developed and so forth. And I said, so we'll have an adventure. So I put together this show called Turn On. The network, again, had nothing else to put on. And we taped this first show. The original commitment, I did a pilot, the original commitment was for 13. And when Bristol Myers saw the first special, they upped the order from 13 to 18. Oh. And it was a true revolutionary show, and they were so excited about this show. And I said, put it on. We'll do the first show so intense and so outrageous that you're going to create great controversy, and then we can tone it down a little bit. So we put the show on the air, and we were in New York. We had screenings set up in New York and California, whatever. And I said, the idea is we will be so outrageous in that first show, we'll create some controversy, and based on that controversy, I'll deliver you a rating on the next show. Now, this doesn't sound possible today, but it wasn't possible then either. But with the success of Laugh-In, I had great acceptance within the networks, and even the censors would accept it. So So we put the first show on the air, and this guy in Cleveland wanted to keep Peyton Place on the air. And you can imagine that. And he was upset that Peyton Place had been replaced by Turn On. So he started calling the stations as the show came across the country. He was calling these stations, and one station after another, we were canceling it. So by the time it appeared in New York, it was a hit. By the time it got to California, it was canceled. And I couldn't believe it. I said the next day, I went to NBC, I said, great, take the show off for a week, and it'll be surprised. They said, no, you don't understand. We're taking the show off forever. And so part of my agreement for me to get any money at all was that I would never air the show. So the show was put in mass mothballs, and some kids got into the Comedy Museum and found tapes of Turn On and started running it. And then people said, what the hell was this? I said, it was me at a very young age having a good time with a bunch of young revolutionaries, and that was what happened with Turn On. But calling it Turn On, which had a mild drug possible reference, you know, and we put it on the air in an impossible time period, and I loved that show. And the screening, when we ran it for press, there was great press behind the show. They said, this is finally a thing, an adventure, whatever. But there's one guy in Cleveland got him to cancel it. And so when kids run that show today, they're saying, well, what was so revolutionary about it? I said, well, how much time do you have? Everything. But today it seems kind of calm, doesn't it?
Well, some of it's still pretty edgy. I mean, for one thing, I don't believe there's a laugh track or anything on that. Yeah.
No, there were sound effects.
Right. Yeah. Right. Maybe
you did do some research, didn't you?
Yeah. Maybe it should have been, taken 3 episodes, make it into a feature, and release it in theaters. It would have been the Kentucky Fried Movie before the Kentucky Fried Movie came along.
Oh, yeah, long before. The Kentucky Fried Movie, Saturday Night Live, all of those things are echoes of what we did on Laugh-In.
I don't want to keep you here forever, but I got to tell you.
That's all right. I'm enjoying talking to anybody who has acquired that much useless information.
Yeah, I'm a repository for it, I'll tell you.
Yeah, that's it. You did a lot of research, didn't you, young fella?
Yeah, I know. I love all this stuff. In fact, this is a good way for me to segue into talking about this YouTube channel that has some of your shows on it now.
Yes.
And one of them is right around the time of Laugh-In, maybe tail end of it. Burlesque is alive and living in Burbank with Goldie Hawn, Carl Reiner, and one of my favorites.
How did you see that?
Because it's up on YouTube, but one of my favorite. I've known about it for a long time because I'm a Bobby Darin fanatic.
Oh God! I just heard. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, but this never aired. This special.
What happened was I wanted to do a new burlesque show, and I got Bobby Darin by Carl Reiner and all these comics that I knew, and we taped this show. Well, we put it on the air, and in the middle of the show, Goldie did a theoretically strip number, but it was like burlesque kind of, burlesque was not dirty. Burlesque was funny, and then Goldie came out and did this number. I love playing it a lot, and everybody loved it.
Here comes Queenie.
So we sent the show back to New York, and New York said, we can't go air this. Goldie Hawn is naked. I said, Goldie Hawn is not naked. And I had 8 censors watching every moment of what happened from California to New York. What went wrong? Everything in the show, everybody okayed it and loved it. Anyhow, I'm getting ready now to release Burlesque is alive and living in Burbank, resurrected. But I'm glad you saw it. You're amazing. You got more information than anybody I've talked to in a long time.
And you also spearheaded the American Comedy Awards. And
oh my God,
I thought that was wonderful because whenever there's award season, comedy's always ignored in all of these award shows.
They have a comic introduce the show and then they forget
That's it. Yep.
Well, that's another one of my adventures because it was comedy. They introduced the show, and I said we should celebrate these people, and we had quite a run of success with that.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're amazing. I'm going to have to adopt you. You're my own living library. You're amazing that you've seen all of that stuff.
I love all that. I was thrilled at the time, when that came out. I was a little kid, but I was thrilled at the time.
You know what it feels like when I hear that from a guy who's hip and with it today, that you were a little kid when it happened? I'm so proud of that I just managed to distort a very promising, fertile mind.
Right. It was all your doing or undoing, one of the other.
See, the art of laughter. When a baby's born, we don't teach it how to eat, sleep, cry, or laugh. The rest of its life, we tell it when to sleep, what to eat, not to cry, and to be careful of what it laughs at. And if you break those rules, and that's what pretty much we've done. And a laugh is the best release. It's the second best release you can have, We won't go into the first because then I'll get you canceled.
Right, that'll be the end of me.
No, you seem to be not only well-informed, but enthusiastic about the idea of what's going on funny.
Yeah, that's kind of my milieu. In fact, I have to tell you, when I spoke to your wife briefly,
yes?
I couldn't have been more nervous because I know who your wife is. And I know,
Jolene.
and I am an Ernie Kovacs devotee.
My God. You are not this is not an interview. This is a celebration, really.
So I couldn't believe. I said, I cannot believe I'm speaking to Jolene from the Ernie Kovacs specials.
Well, but Jolene, this writer that you talked to on the phone, who was very polite and understanding and receptive, now after we've talked for half an hour, says he was thrilled to realize he was talking to Jolene Brand. How nice. She says that's sweet.
Well, it's true.
Ernie loved Jolene.
Oh, and, she's wonderful in those things, especially those big production numbers.
Yeah, the production numbers. And Jolene, I think my favorite shot is when he had Jolene in a bathtub and a periscope came up out of the bathtub.
Right.
But Ernie was a delight, and he was our dear friend, and he loved Jolene. And he would call up and he'd come over to the studio. She had no idea what she was going to do, but she just knew that she loved Ernie, and Ernie would come up with something wonderfully strange. And he did. Boy, we had fun with Ernie. I'm glad what?
He loved you, too. He loved to make you laugh.
Oh, yeah. Well, Ernie and I got together, and Ernie and I would argue endlessly into the wee hours over the need of a punchline. And Ernie said, Ernie, you're so close. All you need is a punchline. I said, no, I don't do punchlines. I said, Ernie, you just do a little bit more, and you've got a punchline. So one night, we're taping, and it's about 10 o'clock at night, and he called. He said, I want you to come over to the studio. And I said, Ernie, I'm in the middle. He said, please. So I said, okay. So I dropped what I was doing. I go over to the studio, and he's over at ABC on a raised stage, and he's doing a monologue, and he's got an automobile on his raised stage. And Ernie says, I want you to see this fine automobile. He put his hand on the fender, and the car went through the floor, right? And everybody was shocked. And Ernie said to me, now, is that a punchline? I said, yeah, Ernie, that's a punchline, all right. But he loved Jolene, and they would just sit there, and he would do wonderful things and laugh, and we loved Ernie. So I'm glad you're a fan of that too.
Oh,
I don't know where you've been, but I've got to keep you.
Oh, I love Ernie Kovacs. I discovered those shows when they were on PBS, I guess sometime in the 80s when they used to be on.
Is that wonderful?
Oh, they're fantastic. The Nairobi Trio and Percy Dove Tonsils.
Jolene was a piano player.
Oh, my gosh. I can't believe it.
What?
See,
Wait, no, Jolene was the blonde ape.
She was the...
I got corrected. She was the blonde gorilla.
See, George,
Jolene playing the piano. She was the blonde gorilla playing the piano.
This entire interview was just me trying to get to Jolene. That's really...
He said, Jolene. The guy said the entire interview was just him trying to get to Jolene. Well, you're here.
Well, once again, the book is called Still Laughing, A Life in Comedy, now out in paperback. Our guest today, George Schlatter. Great honor to have you on the show, sir.
Thank you. We'll talk again one day.
We sure will. Thank you so much. Take care.
Me.